In the 41st floor boardroom of Sterling Urban Group, Victoria Hale laughed when the man in the worn coat said he wanted to make a phone call. She leaned back in her leather chair, eyes sharp with amusement. "Call whoever you want." The room laughed with her. He dialed. 2 seconds later, a voice came through the speaker, and Victoria Hale froze mid-breath. The smile disappeared. Because the person on the other end of that line wasn't someone she could dismiss. So who exactly did he call? Harold Whitman had not always worn a coat with fraying seams. There was a time, not so long ago really, when he sat in boardrooms, not unlike this one, reviewing budgets and shaking hands with city officials. He had spent 22 years running the Eastbridge Community Development Alliance, turning abandoned lots into affordable housing, negotiating with landlords who saw tenants as line items. He was good at it, good enough that people trusted him with their futures. But trust, like money, has a way of disappearing when the wrong things happen at the wrong time. A failed investment wiped out his savings. A legal dispute with a former partner drained what was left. By the time the dust settled, Harold was 64 years old, with nothing but a pension check and a small apartment in Brighton Row, the same neighborhood he had once helped build up from nothing. He did not feel sorry for himself. That was not the kind of man he was. He simply started over smaller. Brighton Row was not a place that appeared on investor pitch decks or city tourism brochures. It was a cluster of aging brick buildings on the south side, where the rent was low and the hallways smelled like old carpet and cooking oil. 14 residents still lived in the building at 22 Marlowe Street, mostly elderly, mostly alone, mostly people who had run out of places to go. Harold knew every one of them by name. He knew that Mrs. Gladys Byrne on the 3rd floor had lived there for 19 years and kept a small garden on her windowsill because she said it reminded her of her late husband. He knew that Ray Whitford on the 2nd floor was a retired steelworker whose knees were too bad for stairs, but who refused to complain about it. They were not just tenants, they were neighbors. And when the eviction notice arrived, printed on thick corporate letterhead with the Sterling Urban Group logo embossed in silver, Harold was the one they turned to. The notice was clean, professional, and final. Sterling Urban Group had acquired the building through a legal purchase from the previous landlord. All permits for demolition had been approved by the city zoning board. Residents had 30 days to vacate. The language was polite, the way a surgeon's explanation is polite before cutting. Everything was in order. There was nothing illegal about it. That was the part that made it worse. Harold did what he had always done. He followed the process. He drafted a formal letter to Sterling Urban Group's headquarters, requesting a meeting to discuss relocation options for the residents. The letter was respectful, clearly written, and supported by documentation of each tenant's circumstances. He sent it by certified mail. 2 weeks passed. No response. He called the company's development division 4 times. The first call was transferred to a voicemail box that was full. The second call reached an assistant who promised someone would follow up. No one did. The third and fourth calls were not returned at all. He was not angry. He understood how large organizations worked, but he also understood what silence meant. He attended a city council session sitting in the back row for 3 hours, while council members discussed zoning variances and commercial tax incentives. When public comment opened, Harold stood and spoke for exactly 3 minutes, the maximum allowed. He described the situation at 22 Marlowe Street. He asked whether the city had any obligation to ensure displaced residents received adequate transition support. The council chair thanked him for his comments and moved to the next item on the agenda. No follow-up, no questions. Just a polite nod and a shift of attention the way you acknowledge a stranger's sneeze on a bus. He visited the legal aid office downtown. A young attorney reviewed the documents and told Harold what he already suspected. Sterling Urban Group had followed every applicable law. The purchase was legitimate. The demolition permits were valid. The eviction timeline met the statutory minimum. There was no cause of action. The attorney looked genuinely sorry when she said it. Harold thanked her and left. He stood on the sidewalk outside the legal aid office for a long time, watching traffic pass, thinking about what options remained. There were not many. Every legitimate door had been opened, walked through, and quietly closed behind him. That evening, Harold sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a decision he had been avoiding. He knew Senator Adrian Cole's phone number by heart, had known it for decades, but he had never dialed it for something like this. Adrian Cole was one of the most powerful political figures in the state. Harold had known him since before the title, before the campaigns, before the fundraising dinners and hotel ballrooms. They had grown up in the same neighborhood. Adrian had once lived 4 blocks from Brighton Row, back when it was just a place where working families tried to make ends meet. Harold had helped Adrian's family once years ago when they were about to lose their apartment. It was not something either of them talked about publicly. It was simply a fact that existed between them, quiet and unchanged. Harold had never asked Adrian for a favor, not once in 40 years. He believed that relationships should not be transactional, that a good deed should not become a debt. And he had no intention of changing that belief now. What he wanted was not a political intervention. What he wanted was a conversation, a real one, face to face with the person who held the power to change things. He wanted to give Victoria Hale the chance to make the right decision on her own, not because a senator pressured her, but because she understood what was at stake. He called a friend that night, a man named Donald Pratt, someone he had known since his days at Eastbridge. Donald asked him what the plan was. Harold told him he was going to walk into Sterling Urban Group's headquarters and request a 60-day extension for the residents. Donald asked what would happen if she said no. Harold was quiet for a moment, then said something that Donald would remember for a long time. "I want to give her the chance to do the right thing, because it is her choice, not because someone forced her hand." Donald told him he was either the most principled man alive or the most stubborn. Harold said he would accept either description. The next morning, he put on his coat and took the crosstown bus to the financial district. The Sterling Urban Group headquarters was a glass tower that caught the morning sun like a mirror. Harold stood outside for a moment looking up at it. He had spent his life working in small offices with bad lighting and second-hand furniture, advocating for people who could not afford lawyers. This building was a different world entirely. He walked through the lobby past the security desk and told the receptionist he was there to see Victoria Hale. The receptionist looked at his coat, then at his face, and asked if he had an appointment. He did not. She told him that Ms. Hale's schedule was fully booked. Harold nodded and said he would wait. He sat in one of the lobby chairs, the kind designed to look expensive rather than feel comfortable, and waited for 2 hours without moving. Eventually, someone from the executive floor came down and escorted him to the 41st floor. Not out of respect, out of curiosity, and perhaps because a 68-year-old man sitting motionless in a corporate lobby for 2 hours tends to make receptionists nervous. The boardroom was large, cold, and smelled like leather and recirculated air. Victoria Hale sat at the head of a long table with 2 associates flanking her. She was 42 years old, sharp-featured, and carried herself with the kind of stillness that comes from years of being the most powerful person in every room she entered. She had built Sterling Urban Group from nothing. No inheritance, no family connections, no safety net. Everything she had earned through calculation discipline and an unwillingness to let sentiment interfere with strategy. She did not know Harold Whitman. She did not know Brighton Row. To her, 22 Marlowe Street was a line on a spreadsheet acquisition cost demolition timeline